This is the RPG Crawler, and welcome to another Tabletops and Taverns. This week, I'm going to continue my Dungeons & Dragons alignment series with a look at the neutral alignments. If you would like to view my other alignment videos, I will put links to them in the description below. As always, these are just my thoughts and considerations and should not be taken as me claiming that this is the one true way these alignments should be played. Alignments, after all, can be approached in a number of ways. Hopefully, however, this video may provide some insight for those players seeking such, be they new or experienced. Let me just add that this was perhaps the hardest of the series to research. So many resources throughout the lifetime of Dungeons & Dragons and related games have dealt with good or evil, but so very few explicitly tackle the neutral alignments. I think I only really found one major resource. It wasn't even Dungeons and Dragons, but rather a Pathfinder book. I will put a link to where you can buy it in the description below, just in case you're interested. It wasn't particularly impressive to me, but when you only got like one or two resources in the matter, then what can you do, you know? I suppose that while the epic struggle between good and evil paints this grand picture in the minds of players, the middle ground in which the vast majority of creatures theoretically belong is kind of harder to define. It is really strange because of the two-axis alignment system. The neutral alignments basically contain a struggle that is every bit as grand and old as that between good and evil, but because it is taken a back burner in recent history with the game, it's kind of really overlooked. Now, I will also include the relatively new unaligned alignment and the neutral alignments, along with lawful neutral, true neutral, and chaotic neutral. Unaligned was added in the 4th edition's Dungeons & Dragons and was one of the few changes to the alignment system in that release, which I actually liked. Its inclusion sort of helps to sort out a long-standing question of the nature of the neutral alignment. In the past, neutrality has either been taken as a disinterest in good or evil, or law and chaos for true neutral characters, or an active attempt to balance them out. Unaligned, while theoretically identical to true neutral, makes for a decent characterization for those characters and NPCs that are unable to really make that rational decision between good, evil, law, and chaos. And that's an important distinction to make a lot of times. The neutral alignments are actually some of the most commonly well-interpreted alignments I've seen played, with the possible exception of chaotic neutral, and certain rare interpretations of true neutral that really we'll get to later. But it's kind of refreshing to see an alignment group that is pretty well represented around the gaming table. Although I could mention, I could chalk this up to the fact that most people in the real world could probably be described as neutral. I mentioned this in my good alignments video, but generally speaking, many people may consider themselves good and broadly agree with positive things that would be represented in the good alignments. But when it comes down to the brass tacks, when it comes down to actually breaking the mold and taking action in such a way that puts themselves at either a risk or an inconvenience, or otherwise bucking the status quo that exists, a surprisingly small amount of those people that say that they would do good actually go out of their way to do so. And it's just the way things are, and that's the reason why I believe that a lot of the neutral characters are easy for a lot of people to play. It's also why terrible things sometimes are allowed to happen in real life, even when someone stepping in could have stopped things from progressing, either on a personal level or a broadly regional level. I hate to use terms like complacency and apathy, but they fit rather well when you're talking about this sort of thing. Psychological experiments have generally shown people tend to go along with the orders of a superior, for instance, even if they have misgivings. They tend to use what power they are given to make life easier for themselves, even if that's beyond the scope of the original intentions. And they tend really not to want to disrupt a situation if it's still bearable to them, or be the first one to step in to intervene when in a dangerous situation when others could do so. Not saying this is true of everybody, but in the bell curve of people who would either make things worse or actively step in to make things better, a lot of people will just, hold on and not do anything. And that kind of really represents the whole neutral aspect of the alignments. There's a variety of phenomena that explain everything, but added up, it is a neutral alignment for a lot of people from a gameplay perspective. These people are not actively evil. They aren't seeking to destroy for destruction's sake or exploit a system necessarily to harm others for their own benefit. But they will go along with such if they think it'll avoid their own pain and inconvenience. And they may exploit a system to ease their own life if it doesn't necessarily directly inflict damage on another. They're kind of wishy-washy that way, and that's okay. It's okay. That is what a neutral alignment is, in my opinion. And this is, of course, just my opinion, but this especially is. The neutral alignments should have more flexibility than, say, a committed good or evil alignment. I mentioned in my good alignments video that there was a stark difference between a character that just has good jotted down on the alignment section and one that actively takes proactive measures to bury that needle into the good spectrum. I don't think that there's such a gradation with regards to the neutral alignments. Indeed, someone who is actively seeking to bury that needle into neutral on the good-evil axis actually kind of runs more of a risk of sliding along the law and chaos axis instead. I would go so far as to say that it may be more acceptable for a character who is barely evil or barely good to just jot down neutral as their alignment and go with it, and then see where things lie. If a character actively wants to do good but rarely goes out of their way to do so, or is willing to do that lying and cheating and stealing, but not in a manner that actively and viciously harms people, then honestly the neutral alignments seem just fine for that. They can always slide further along the good-evil axis with their later actions. Another thing I should mention before really getting into the meat of the matter is in my general alignments video, I addressed the 3 old alignments from original D&D, Law, Neutral, and Chaos, that single-axis system. And many of the things that I talked about in that particular video regarding the 3 alignment system are relevant to the neutral alignments as a whole. I will put a link to that, of course, in the description below for those who haven't taken a look at it and want to. And that is an interesting little thing, because that original Law versus Chaos sort of outlook can really be translated into the neutral alignments very well. In fact, while I grouped these neutral alignments in together for the purpose of these 3 videos, they're not actually that much alike. Yeah, they all 3 take a balanced stance between good and evil, but this just kind of stresses the fact that they cover the entire law-chaos axis, and essentially the 2 extremes of the neutral alignments oppose themselves. It would be like me putting a similar video together. Instead of going good, neutral, evil on my divisions, I would be going law, neutral, chaos, and then you get a video with neutral good, neutral, and neutral evil in it. And those, of course, neutral good and neutral evil are diametrically opposed. So bear that in mind as we go forward. Although the neutral alignments do have some similarities, they are far closer to being grouped by convenience than by that particular theme. As I did in my good alignments video, I will touch upon each of the major 3 neutral alignments. Lawful neutral, neutral, or true neutral is sometimes called, and chaotic neutral. But I'll also touch on unaligned as a subset of neutral, and I'll give examples of character types that might fit into each category, as well as certain principles which tie into each alignment. Again, these are not meant to be all-inclusive by any stretch of the imagination. They're just a point to start from. Let's start with lawful neutral. A lawful neutral character is one bound by order without regard to good or evil. They are, in effect, the ultimate representative of the forces of civilization, or at the very least, a mechanistic view of the universe. The cold, unfeeling judge who hands down decisions without regard to the relevant merit of those he passes judgment on is probably lawful neutral. But so is the soldier who never questions his orders in the slightest. The alchemist who doesn't let the consequences of her search for how things work, that might come to mind as well, as far as fitting the bill for lawful neutral. They expose new knowledge with a logical methodical method without regard for how it may be later used. A few principles which might resonate with lawful neutral characters are duty, authority, and logic. All of these kind of tend to rely on order of some sort. Furthermore, certain qualities associated with lawful good and lawful evil might also be seen in the lawful neutral character, albeit to a somewhat reduced intensity. And this is going to be true throughout all of the three alignments. You're going to see some of the lawful, or some of the good and some of the evil creep in terms of relevancy. The character's actions follow a certain set of rules because they expect everyone to follow those rules. Either those people they interact with, or in the case of logic, they could be looking at these set of rules of the universe itself as things that they need to play by. The existence of these rules means that things should work in a predictable manner for these characters, at least from their viewpoint. The judge uses his authority to hand down decisions based on the laws he's sworn to uphold. And he does that in full confidence because he assumes that those laws were passed by someone with the proper authority to do so. The soldier might never question his orders because he believes it's his duty to follow them, and the duty of his superiors to only issue those orders which are expected by the rules of engagement. The alchemist may have no fear about whether her discoveries might be used for good or evil, because logically anyone who followed the same methods would eventually discover them, and it is better that the truth be known by all. All of these kind of things, the characters are operating within the order of their own universe and expecting others to act in a similar manner. A lawful neutral character is a creature of habit. Generally, not always. They're someone who follows the rules even when there may not be anyone around to enforce them. They may not always put stock in the laws of the nation they're in, but they'll generally have some sort of code, whether it be a chivalric code, a professional code, or even just a personal code. Lawful neutral personalities tend to be somewhat focused on hierarchy, or what is correct, rather than what is right. If you've ever spoken with someone who just used terms like, well, if somebody gets wrongly arrested by the police, well, they should have just obeyed the officer, or if you've got nothing to hide, then you shouldn't worry when you're talking about laws that maybe invade your privacy. Those are the kinds of things that might be said by a lawful neutral character. They generally put primacy on the law itself. Someone who is more concerned over the process than the particular justice of an event. Next on the list is neutral. Also known as true neutral, or very occasionally neutral. This alignment has been represented in a lot of different ways over the years, and a lot of different ways by different characters throughout the history of the game. It's supposedly the most populated alignment, being the default for most humans and animals, and represents no particular commitment to law, chaos, good, or evil. It has also been interpreted by some characters and organizations as actively seeking to maintain some sort of universal balance. I've never been a big fan of that particular idea, at least when applied to the alignment as a whole, but I could certainly see certain true neutral organizations having a place in some campaigns, actively working to control destabilizing forces of the various alignment extremes. This is also classically the alignment of druids, with their focus on the natural forces of the world. Although since 3rd edition, this has kind of been relaxed more and more as the druids have been able to take different alignments. Further, where neutral, as I just said, used to cover things like animals and non-sentient creatures and things like elementals or golems and such that didn't have an intellectual capacity to discern the difference between the various alignments. Now they've got the new unaligned alignment. As I said, introduced in 4th edition, it was held over in 5th edition to a lesser degree for similar purposes. I like its inclusion. It represents either having literally no alignment, like a rock or a stone, or lacking the ability to rationally choose an alignment. These creatures are unconcerned with the forces of the multiverse, not by choice, but because they simply cannot grasp those forces. Since it's mostly for animals or automatons, I'm not going to be covering it in depth, but it does bear mentioning. And I believe you can actually take it as a character alignment in 4th edition. Neutral kind of encompasses the druid, eschewing civilization and being in tune with the sometimes cruel, sometimes nurturing ways of the wild and its natural cycles. It also includes something like the humble craftsman who's focused upon his trade and his family without a particular care for the greater forces around him. Then there's some people like the diplomat who must be adaptable and sometimes, they must be adaptable to strange philosophies and cultures. They must be able to operate in lands which may be drastically different from their own, and sometimes able to do things above the board and sometimes below the board, depending on what's going to accomplish her overall mission. Neutral characters may be largely disinterested or detached from these greater forces, but they can take stands on good or evil or lawful or chaos. They just do so on an individual case-by-case basis. They don't make these broad, sweeping generalities. Generally, a neutral character will prefer to... any character is probably going to prefer to live under a good society than an evil one. Not because they agree with them, but because they personally have an easier time of things. Good aligned societies are less likely to oppress you. They may, for that matter, a neutral character may suffer the yoke of an evil society longer than an equivalent good aligned character might. Not because they agree with their goals, but because a neutral character's actions are going to be less likely to attract the attention of the secret police or whatever than a good character's might. And that's an interesting little just an interesting little fact to remember if you're going to be playing in a campaign with a lot of evil-dominated societies. Neutral characters may follow principles from throughout every alignment, perhaps not as strongly as those skewed along either axis. But there are still some principles which are associated not necessarily only, but mostly with true neutral characters. These are things like balance, like endurance, flexibility. A druid who embraces the wild values balance, in that she understands that life can be cruel and kind in turn, and both have their place. And that the world is often an uncaring place governed only by natural cycles that make it up, and it is either futile or of benefit to simply roll along with those cycles. In contrast, the craftsman may represent kind of a sort of endurance. He shoulders the burdens of society so that his family can prosper, and he shrugs off of adversity when it crops up, but doesn't necessarily go out of his way to correct it. And adversity can happen even in good aligned societies, especially for somebody who is not, burying the needle into the good alignment. We'll go ahead and look at the diplomat. The diplomat values flexibility a lot of times, just because she understands that the very same people that she's sharing dinner with that night might be mortal enemies on the next morning. And she may have to maintain cordial relations with a foreign land by respecting their culture even when it clashes with her own. And as a result, this kind of flexibility, rather than enduring change, she can adapt with it. And you've got those two principles or seem to be at opposite ends, but they really kind of both make up this neutral alignment. True neutral principles tend to be rational reflections of qualities that the natural world might exhibit. Things honed to help ensure survival. A lot of them depend on the individual serving their own means, but not at the expense of the greater, not at the expense of others. Finally, we reach chaotic neutral, the only one of the three neutral alignments which brings some concerns up for me whenever I see it on someone's sheet. I mentioned before that generally speaking, neutral alignments are at least adequately played more often than good and evil alignments. However, as chaotic good is often represented more as chaotic neutral, so too is chaotic neutral a lot of times played as chaotic evil way more often than it should. Mind you, I'm not saying by any means that this is happening a majority of the time, but it happens more often than it should, so it is worth noting, especially for somebody who's new to GMing. It's not always the player's fault either. because chaotic neutral has traditionally been defined in a lot of diverse ways. There are videos of it online, discussing this. It has changed in how it's been defined from edition to edition quite wildly. Chaotic neutral is a reflection of chaos. It's unhindered by concerns of good or evil. And it's sometimes been described as the alignment of gamblers, of the insane, of hermits and loners. And that's not entirely untrue. That's not entirely untrue, but these various approaches to chaos all stem from different sources. And ascribing only insanity or only one of these other sources as the sole cause of a character's chaotic neutral alignment can really limit players' imaginations on other potential and equally valid interpretations. This is also the alignment that so many maintain the balance true neutral characters end up veering towards. The sort that'll switch alignments if it looks like good or evil might be getting the upper hand at that particular moment. Do that often enough and it's no longer maintaining the balance, it's just being chaotic. You're no longer true neutral, you're kind of looking kind of insane to the outside world. Another way to approach chaotic neutral characters can be to focus, rather than on insanity and in just unpredictability, to focus on the personal, individualistic aspects of a character's personality. Rather than randomness, it can simply mean a rejection of the strictures and orders of civilization, and reliance on things like personal honor and self-determination instead. The lunatic who knows not what he's doing is chaotic neutral. But so is the elegant gambler who simply roams from game to game, making their own way, living by his luck and his skill without any really plan for the future. And let's take a look at the freebooter. Pirate, maybe not a super violent pirate, but a robber who sails the seas, plundering and pillaging, but they live by a code, and that code sometimes avoids unnecessary bloodshed. They rely more on intimidation in some cases. Just the mere threat may secure the victims' cooperation, and then when they're treating with their own troops, a lot of times they're going to value the individual goals of everybody on their crew. I said troops, I mean crew. It can be hard to think of ascribing principles to a chaotic neutral character, but there are some out there. Certain things common to both chaotic good and chaotic evil characters may not be out of line either. As I've said before, chaotic neutral character can waver more often. A chaotic neutral character can waver between good and evil more than most. Just within reason, but they've got a lot more leeway than a lot do. Just a sampling of a scattering of principles that can help define a chaotic neutral character are spontaneity, wanderlust, and individualism. The lunatic that doesn't know what he's doing until he does it is an example of spontaneity, but so is a somewhat impulsive bard. A gambler who moves from game to game, always seeking the next big score, is a good demonstration of wanderlust, in that they're just wandering the world. A freebooter who lives by her freedom and respects the choices of her crew and her victims alike can be said to value individuality. They don't follow society's rules, but they follow their own in a certain way. There's a lot of leeway in there, but they depend on more on their honor than, any kind of actual code or rule set. These principles are perhaps the most diverse of any of the alignment qualities I've covered in all of my videos. But that's the nature of chaotic neutral. It is unpredictable, and many different things can lend themselves to the same sort of alignment result in this case. So, there you've got the 3 neutral alignments plus unaligned. Maybe, as I said, the most diverse of all the 3 major alignment groups. At the same time, it's also the one with the most kernels of the original 3 alignments from D&D still present in it. These are, as I have stated before, just a few of my thoughts on the matter, are just ideas on ways that somebody might effectively present these alignments. As I said before, in my experience, neutral alignments are actually pretty well played by a lot of players. But I think that's mostly because of the great amount of flexibility that they possess, in addition to the natural proclivity for most people to be neutral. And to think that the neutral alignments have shifted their definition, all of them have really kind of been all over the place in their different definitions over the years. It kind of is amazing that people grasp them as well as they do. I'm going to take this moment, however, to ask a serious question of my viewers here. I mentioned that I did find one source book for neutral characters, and that was the Pathfinder Champions of Balance book. I honestly was only kind of moderately satisfied with it, but I will put a link to them in the description below anyway. But I'd like to know if there's any other first or third party kind of books, doesn't matter, any other source books that are just devoted to the neutral alignments. It's a pretty glaring gap in my collection and my knowledge. Just leave a comment below if you know anything that I might find interesting and care to share. For now, I think I'm going to leave this video as is. This has been the RPG Crawler with just my take on the neutral alignments. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, comment if you have feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.